Hi, ladies and gentlemen. A good day to you. By popular demand, I have converted my seminar on the Art of Controllership to a podcast to make it conveniently available to everyone. I hope you will find this podcast useful. I am Leng Wai, or in the West, Leng Wai Chan. Let me give you a brief introduction about myself. I started as a trainee accounts clerk in a German knitwear producer, worked my way to become the accountant in a FMCG company and then became the national sales manager. I then joined a general trading and investment company and was their branch manager and then general manager in Hong Kong. After that, I joined a US technology company as the controller for Hong Kong. Within 2 years, I was promoted to be the CFO for Hong Kong. And a year later, I was posted to Singapore and promoted to be the CFO for Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific operations had revenue of about $1 billion and about 8,000 employees. I was then still in my early 30s. After a few more years, I started my own business consulting firm, which I run to this day. In the last few years, I have served on audit committees for public listed companies. You can find more in my profile in LinkedIn. But overall, I believe I did very well. I'd like to share some of the gems I had acquired over the years with you. You can also type in your questions later and I will answer them. By the way, this podcast is only to cover some of the gems and it's not a complete accountancy course. So please pay attention, there will be a test at the end. So what is controllership? In the standard part, you start as an accountant, maybe accounts clerk, or in my case, a trainee accounts clerk. You start in financial accounting, move to costing, management accounting, financial reporting, financial management, and controllership. In this seminar, I shall focus on controllership and especially in the operational finance of the controllership, okay? So what is controllership? It basically is a checking, processing, and accounting of transaction, compilation and analysis of financial report, control and management of income and expenses, essentially all operational expenses. I will leave out the strategic aspects, which are really the role of the CFO. So what is the most important thing in operational finance? I think firstly, you need to establish your financial nuts and bolts. This is fundamental. If you don't have your financial nuts and bolts, you cannot proceed. Normally, financial reports are submitted weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. They will also be presentation to your peers, your bosses, and all the board. You need to know your audience. Now, a flaw, I would say, maybe even fatal flaw for many accountants is that we tend to squeeze all our numbers into a table, presenting what we call an eye chart as I show here. So what we are trying to do is to force our audience to become accountants. I think what we need to do is to present the results and recommendation and not just flash up all the numbers. When I first became the controller for Hong Kong for the US technology company, we had quarterly reviews where our CEO will fly in from the US. And in my first presentation, I actually put up something like an eye chart. He took one look at it, turned to his corporate controller and said, "You need to talk to this guy." And I thought that was the end of my career in that company. I will come back to it later, but let me share with you what I subsequently learned. I subsequently learned to prepare presentations in what I would call simplified charts. So like in this particular case, we did an average product cost, which shows basically the volume going up, the cost, of course, going up, but less so. And as a result, the average cost start coming down, right? This is basically on the product cost. And to supplement that, I will also do what we call an average overhead cost, which basically then show same thing, the volume, the cost, and then the overhead is dropping more dramatically. So with this, when I present, I can highlight what I want to inform my audience. They can ask a question, right? You have to do your homework. You need to know the stories behind the number because you will be asked. You need to be confident. And if you have the stories behind the number, you will be confident and you are in control. So let me re-emphasize. You need to establish your financial nuts and bolts. It is fundamental. However, don't be stuck. Use it and move on. Now, the other gem I want to share is that in the very first week when I joined the US technology company, there were two controllers from the US in town, and they told me that the Hong Kong operations have a huge inventory hole in the hundreds of millions. And they were in town to do 100% physical count. I subsequently learned that the Hong Kong operations actually have been doing 100% physical count for the last few months. So I sat down with finance, operations, warehouse, and IT. And essentially, what we did was we relay out the physical location. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong chart. So we basically lay out the physical inventory. If I may show you, it is actually in here. So if you look at this first part of it, it actually, the initial location was very simple. It basically have raw materials, work in progress, and finished goods. And so raw materials goes into work in progress. They will not track, and so they go through the various processes until they come out in finished goods, and then they will track again. And this actually accounts for a lot of the variances. So we basically broke up the different inventory flow into different locations. So we have different product line. So we have direct material for product A, direct material for product B, for product C, and also for like indirect materials. And then in the work in progress, we have by product line. So we have like station 1, station 2, station 3, same thing for product B, same thing for product C. And in the finished goods, then we have location for finished goods, product A, finished goods, product B. So what basically happened was that we created, I believe at that time, maybe 100 over locations to capture all the different movement of the inventory. As a result of that, within three months, I think, we reduced the physical inventory variance to 2 to 3%. And in another 3 months, we reduced it below 0.1%. Our US corporate office couldn't believe the progress that we had made. They were even mumbling that Hong Kong operations was doctoring its books. I mean, this is really talking about using basic IT tools. And more importantly, we were enforcing ownership and accountability. In the first couple of meetings, we explained to the operations and warehouse people to explain to them what we were trying to do and to seek their cooperation. Then we have regular meetings. And this is where I put the managers and supervisors in charge of each of the location. I put their feet to the fire to make them explain when there were physical variances. The divisional heads, I know, were very unhappy when they have variances by their managers or supervisors. And I know after the meeting, they will go and chew up their managers. So it was actually very effective, this accountability and ownership. Now, the other gems that I want to show is about the power of marginal costing and contribution analysis. I find it strange that marginal contribution and contribution analysis doesn't seem to be much used in business. It seems to be rather academic. I am actually very fond of marginal costing and contribution analysis, and I use them very often in the course of my career. So let me share with you my biggest success in using contribution analysis. In the US technology company, we have two divisions, the high-end low volume and the low-end high volume business. Now the company favored the high-end low volume business, and there were plans to shut down the low-end high volume business. I did my analysis and I didn't agree. We had a new CEO and he came to town. So I took the opportunity to show him my analysis. So let me show you what I did on my contribution analysis. So this is the original product costing. So we have the high-end low volume and the low-end high volume. So if you look at it, you could see that revenue-wise, the low-end high volume contributed about 80% of the volume, and in terms of volume, they actually contributed something like, I don't know, 90% of the volume, 90% of the volume. And if you look at the direct material, for example, I mean, the finance department at the time split up the direct material cost, the scrap, and the direct labor to show the total direct cost. Now then, what they then did was that overheads were allocated by volume. So you have production equipment even allocated by volume, engineering, logistic facilities, factory general admin, HQ allocation. You will notice the HQ allocation here is a very large amount, about 90 million, which was allocated by our US head office. So based on this, if you look at it, the factory profit actually shows about 9 million contribution by the high-end low volume. And the low-end high volume actually contributed a loss of $13 million. And that was the rationale for shutting down the low-end high volume business. I redo the numbers, same revenue, volume, everything. I allocated out the direct material, scrap, and direct labor, same as before. And what I did was that, well, actually for the production equipment and even for engineering of facilities, we could actually identify whether they were being used by the high-end or the low-end manufacturing. And based on that, I reallocated the cost involved in the equipment, in the engineering resources, and in the use of the facilities. And even in logistics, we could quite accurately identify up to 90% of the cost for high-end or low-end, which again I did. Now, when I did all this reallocation, we find that, okay, based on contribution margin, the high-end was actually losing $20 million and the low-end was making $126 million. Now, bear in mind, this dramatic change was not because I arbitrarily reallocated the equipment, engineering facilities, and logistic expenses, but we actually could identify the production equipment by high-end or low-end. We actually allocated engineering resources by high-end and low-end, and the production was done on dedicated floors for high-end and low-end. So it was all pretty, I should say, pretty identified to the high-end or low-end. Now then came to the other one, that in terms of the factory overheads, okay, that one is harder to say directly allocate. So what I did was I allocate according to payroll costs, so I had essentially the bulk of it going to the high volume, low end business. And even with that, you could see that the factory profit in terms of the high end was a loss of $25 million. And the high end, the high volume, low end actually contributed something like $112 million profit. Now I didn't allocate out the HQ overheads, and I just show it as a separate line, 90 million. I mean, it is really not in my role to question the HQ allocation, but I think the new CEO picked up on that. So what happened was that he took note of it, and within a week after he returned to the US, our corporate office sent us revised production schedule to ramp up the low-end, high-volume business and to shut down the high-end, low-volume business. That actually ranked as one of my greatest achievements in my career as a CFO. Now, the other gem that I would like to share is something that we did in the company. It's very simple yet effective method to reduce exposure in the long lead time items, long lead time capital expenditure item. What I mean is, let me show you this. So in terms of production equipment, when we place an order for production equipment, order lead time is around 5 to 6 months, and each of the production equipment would cost millions of dollars. So giving you an example, we actually work with engineering, and they broke down the different components of the production equipment. And we always find that the very long lead time equipment or components contribute a very small cost portion of the total cost of the equipment. So in this case, for example, we are talking about equipment $10 million, of which the specific customized part costs only about $300,000, but they could take from about 5 months to be customized and delivered, right? Then we have customized part, not so specific, which takes about 3 months and about $1 million. Then we have off-the-shelf parts, which is about $7 million, and they can be delivered within a month. We have fabrication materials, which takes another month, right? So if you look, and then when they all come together at a few months and then go into fabrication, 700,000. So total is about $10 million. What we did was, we then told our supplier that, okay, we are going to order this production equipment, but you only need to order the customized part, and we are willing to give you a purchase order for the $300,000 to cover you. And that could be placed, like, let's say 6 months ahead of time. And in about 3 months time, we then give them the purchase order for the customized part, which is another $1 million. This was very, very important to us because honestly, in our production, we only have realistic production schedule for about 1 or 2 months. And to place order for production equipment 6 months ahead of time that cost tens of millions of dollars was a lot of exposure for us. So, I mean, this doesn't cover everything about CapEx. Like I say, I'm going to just share with you gems that I have picked up along the way. Now, the other thing I would like to share is about building relationship through credit management. Again, this is not a complete course on credit management, but really this shows one of my experience with, let's say, a commercial bank having a customer in the manufacturing of brake pads. They were a long-time customer of the bank. They had about $30 million in land and building, $20 million in plant and equipment, receivables about $25 million, inventory $15 million, and their cash were down to about $1 million. Their current liabilities were about $20 million. Which is basically all payables, right? Net current asset of $71 million, share capital about $10 million, accumulated profit $51 million, and long-term bank loan was $10 million, which was given by the commercial bank. So because of the COVID situation, before the COVID, their revenue was about 10 million a month, and they have about 2 million cash flow. 10 million revenue a month and about 1 million net cash in. During the COVID time, they only had revenue of about 2 million because of a lot less traveling. And they were losing like $500,000 cash every month. The company had retrenched about 20% of its employee and kept the balance at about 50% of their wages. Payables and receivables were both extended. Loan installment had been deferred apart from the interest element. And despite all this, cash has dropped from about 7 million at the beginning of CQ1 to about 1 million currently. The company is actually requesting for another 3 million additional loan to tide them over for the next 6 months when they expect the business to slowly recover as the restriction was reduced. I think the bank corporate office was of the opinion that they should try to recover the loan of 10 million, liquidate the assets and maybe the land and building. They were worried that the cash position of the bank, of this customer will keep dropping and they would be in trouble. We looked at the numbers and we tend to agree with the customer. We feel that their business will turn around, they're managing it well, they have a good track record. And so we recommended that the bank actually extend the 3 million additional credit line to them. Then we have another case study where this is a distributor for an FMCG company. Land and building 2 million, plant and equipment 1 million, current asset about 3.1 million, of which about 2 million were receivables or deposit and 1 million in inventory. Cash was only about 100,000. And they had payables of about 5 million, which was essentially all owed to the principal, right? And so they have a net current liabilities of about 1.9 million. Share capital about 1 million, accumulated loss 2.6, and they have a bank loan about 500,000. So the company requested for deferment of paying for the goods because they say business was bad. The principal actually have a bank guarantee from the distributor for 5 million for the goods. We felt that the customer was not being very upfront. We looked at their numbers and we say it can't be just because business was bad. We felt that funds has actually been diverted to other purposes because there was so little current asset left in the company. And so we recommended to the principal to cash out the bank guarantee. So those are two examples of credit management. Another very good example I had on credit management was in actually my first job, where my finance director actually told me that, well, if we have small suppliers where their invoices are small amount, I can't remember, below 1,000 or something like that, or below 5,000, he told me, you actually don't have to put them into the AVL or approved vendor list. You could just process their invoices and put them up for payment. Two reasons for that. One was, these are generally, in most cases, small suppliers, right? And they would appreciate if we didn't put them on credit terms where, sometimes it could be 60 days, and sometimes 90 days. So we just pay them within the next pay cycle. The other reason was really for a lot of these small supplier, which could actually constitute a very large number, they could take up a lot of paperwork for us. So in a way, it was also to reduce our administrative costs. When I became the CFO for the US technology company, I implemented the same policy whereby I think for suppliers who were less than 5,000, I told my people to just process them for payment. There was no need to keep them in the AVL. Now, another thing that as accountant we always have to deal with is in terms of forecasting cost reduction in budgeting. When company is doing well, everybody is happy. Your your revenue goes up, so you could afford to increase your costs and your overheads, right? But when business is bad, then the company squeeze everybody to do cost reduction. And a lot of times, our operations people will be complaining that they can't reduce costs anymore, because they have very cut to the bone. One of the things I told my business analyst was to work with the operations controller to look at one item, for example, like headcount. We always ask for reduction in headcount, and operations will always say, I can't cut anybody. But I told my business analyst, what is your attrition rate? Ask the operation, what is the attrition rate? In most cases, it could be as high as 2 to 3% per quarter. I say, if you consider that, and you know that business is bad and you won't be hiring new staff, right? You already have a 2 to 3% cost reduction in there. But of course, then you need to be flexible. Your people need to be able to be rotated, because the attrition may happen in areas that is not where you plan to cut. So you need to be able to rotate your staff or your operations people around. That's one. The other thing is on cost reduction. You will always hear that our cost is going up. Suppliers keep asking to increase our cost. But seriously, I ask you, you are running a business. How often have you heard the salespeople complaining that our customer is asking for cost reduction, and they need to reduce the cost, right? So we are actually customer to our supplier. How can it be that in our case, our costs are going up, but in the case of our customer, our selling price is going down? So I said, realistically, we need to look at price reduction from our supplier. Now, one of my business analysts actually told me, he said, your advice is very scary, but it sounds very true. But at the end of the day, I tell you, a lot of them actually managed to achieve their routine 5 to 8% cost reduction without too much heartburn by adopting some of these policies. Now, the other area is in mergers and acquisition. I'm going to cover only the operational aspect because the strategic aspect is under the CFO. When the deal is done, it's then the time to integrate. There is a bucket for acquisition costs, but they are also continuing expenses, and most of them may refer to in terms of what we call personnel costs. Example, difference in salary needed to be sorted out by HR. The important thing is that you have to make sure that when HR propose any adjustment in the salary or benefits, make sure they cover all related benefits, and it should include shift, overtime, bonuses. Let me try to share with you one of it, okay? So like in this case, this is just a simple example. For example, company AAA, base salary is about 1,500, triple B, base salary is about 1,300, shift allowance for AAA is $10, and for triple B is $15 per day, right? And you look down the list, they have meal allowance, overtime rate, and the rest, right? So what you want to avoid is to come back and say, okay, because we need to keep the base salary the same, right? So we have to increase all the employees in company triple B to 1,500 to match up with AAA. Otherwise, they'll be very unhappy. But then when you look at the shift allowance, you say triple A is getting $10, while triple B is getting $15. We cannot reduce the triple B shift allowance, so we have to increase the triple A shift allowance. And so the same basis will then go on down the line. I disagree with this approach. So what I asked my business analysts to do was to sit down with HR and compute what was the total, I should say, take-home pay for employee A and take-home pay for employee B based on the existing structure, and try to normalize that. So for some, they may have less. For others, they may actually get more. And that way, we reduce the unnecessary or lopsided increase. Because if I look at this, this will increase, and then this will increase, and then this will increase, and then this will increase. I mean, the company end up paying a lot more for personnel costs, which is not fair to the company. I mean, the employees, of course, will be very happy because everything goes up and none of it come down, right? So that is the important thing on personnel costs. Now, the next part is more inspiring, and it is on pursuing your role, right? This is relevant not only to controllers, but to all professions. But my podcast, I'm going to focus mainly on controller. You can take a break here. You can pause this and come back. Okay, so welcome back. The first part, we cover operational finance, specific controllership gems, and a lot of the fundamentals of controllership. Now I'm sharing gems in positioning and pushing your role. Not all controllers play the same role, I understand, but this is what I would consider as the true controller role, right? First is really talking about the fear factor. And I'm not talking about in company, I'm talking about you, right? I'm not asking you to go and do bungee jumping, right? Accountants by nature play safe. We are trained to be conservative, right? But I always take calculated risks. And to do that, I plan and I analyze. As one of my bosses told me, you always have a game plan. My plan are not specific. They generally point into a direction, and opportunity will arise along the way, and you just have to seize them as you go. So in my case, for example, I moved from an accountant to become the national sales manager. Now that opened doors for me to then become a general manager for the general trading and investment company in Hong Kong. And even when I got my controllership position with the US technology company, the head of HR told me that the reason they hired me was that at that time, I think I had only about 4 years of accounting experience, but I had another 2 years of business management experience. And they wanted a controller who was not a bean counter, but someone who can help the business and advise the management on business issues. Then from a controller, I became the CFO. And when the company was then acquired by another company, I took on the role as a strategist to do the integration and moved back to become the CFO. I am known to stick out my neck. For example, when I showed the earlier example about the contribution analysis, the whole company was planning to shut down low A, high volume business. We had a new CEO on board, and I took that opportunity to present to him my analysis. Now, I am not reckless, but I was very aggressive. And I know I ruffled a lot of feathers during my career. I would even term myself difficult. I'm sure a number of my boss agreed with that. But I think I was appreciated because I was very direct. I was very fair, and I always do my homework. I'm not exceptionally gifted, nor am I especially bright, but I am a very good observer and absorber. I observe and I absorb data, information, and situation. I churn them over, I analyze them, and I make my own recommendations, right? Now, in order to be able to do all this, you need to ask the right question. You cannot just accept numbers at face value. The how, what, why, and when are very important. Just to give you two examples. One was early in my career as the accountant for the FMCG company. This was in the early days before before accounting system become all fully integrated, right? So we had about 1 week to close the monthly accounts, but very often I don't get the management report until like 2 weeks later, sometimes even 3 weeks. So I asked my accounting department, what is happening? And they told me that, well, because the branches don't submit them their financial report on time. So I asked the branches, what is holding you up? And the branch financial people told me that, well, because the operations and salespeople don't submit their invoices, their purchase order and delivery orders, their expenses and their claims on time. So I called for a meeting with finance and the operations and sales head and explained to them, look, this has to be done punctually. If you don't submit within the time period specified, your numbers, your claims, your expenses, your invoices, or your purchase order will not be taken into account until the next month, right? Similar thing happened even with the US technology company. Yes, we have a fully integrated financial systems. We have a 24 hours closing, which basically means that at the end of the next working day, we have to submit our financial report to our corporate office. And I knew that my accounting department was struggling with this, and sometimes they missed the deadline. So I asked them what was the problem. And they say that, well, because they couldn't close the book on the following day, early in the morning, because the warehouse and logistic people have not closed their accounts. I mean, it was still hanging open and they were still posting entries. So I asked the warehouse and logistic people, hey, you can't be posting entry for last month on the first day of the next month. And they explained that, well, operations was running until midnight. And we concentrated on shipping out everything. We had no time to do the posting until the next morning. We come back to work, then we start doing the posting. So I could have taken a very hard stand and said, no, I'm sorry. If you are not posted at midnight, that's the end of it. But I was willing to be a bit flexible. I said, well, okay, so long as you have shipped it out by midnight, you can do the posting, but you need to come back earlier in the morning. You need to finish your posting by 9 a.m. so that my accounting people can start closing their books. That makes a lot of difference to my accounting people, because otherwise they were staying way, way past midnight until 1, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. even sometimes to try to close the books for the corporate office. Now, coming to a very important part of what I really want to talk about as a controller is that, you're not just a numbers man. You need to be very business oriented. You need to take an interest in the processes of the business, get involved in the business, whether it's sales or operation discussion, and don't always have to give your input as a finance person. Even as a general business person, you could try to give your input. I do that all the time. In fact, I get so involved in different aspects of the operations that my COO, in one of his visits to Singapore, had a one-on-one with me, and he told me, I'm so flexible. They can consider me for a variety of non-financial roles, which, frankly speaking, I was quite excited about. To me, I don't see myself as just a finance person. I see myself as an overall, at that time, an overall corporate executive, right? Unfortunately, what happened was that I think about a month or two later, there was another change of management in our corporate office, and the new team doesn't know my history, so I have to start all over again. Now, one of my very proud achievement was really in developing my teams. I had a very I should say qualified, talented, and ambitious team of accountants, right? And so I went about developing them, not just in the financial part, but also to expose them to the other aspect of the business. So I attached the business analyst and the finance manager to the different departments and divisions. We had quarterly SBR, strategic business review, and I requested to the division heads to assign one analyst or finance manager in each of the SBR. They were initial resistance, and one of the division head even asked me, why do you want your finance people in our SBI? It has nothing to do with finance. I explained to them that no, I think it's good for my finance people to understand what you do, so they appreciate your issues and your problems, and they will be in a better position to support you. So that went ahead, and there was general acceptance. In fact, I think after a couple of 2 or 3 meetings after that, the same division head came to me into my room one day and said, we are about to start our SBR and your finance manager is not there. I mean, he actually looked forward to having a finance present in this SBR. But of course, it would also need the finance people to be flexible. They need to be brave to take on this type of role. I also rotate them around, so moving them from financial accounting to costing, to business management, to become a business analyst, and things like that. I got on well with them, or rather you could say they got on well with me. We had team buildings, we had social gatherings. I even invited them to my house for parties. Some even discussed their career direction with me. But we generally don't talk about personal matters, except maybe about buying a property or putting our children in the right kindergarten or primary school at the time. I mean, most of us at that time were in our late 20s or mid to early 30s. I have to admit that I don't think most of them see me as a friend in the true sense of the word, but we got along very well professionally. I was open, I was very upfront, and I was very direct. And I think we all benefited from that. As a controller or even as a finance person, you need to be very firm, but you need to be diplomatic, right? I have always been very firm about my belief. I stood my ground. Nowadays, I'm a lot more diplomatic. When I was younger, I was very aggressive, and like I mentioned earlier, I ruffles a lot of feathers, right? But I have always been open-minded, and I've always been fair. In one of the meetings that I sat in together with 2 division heads, we were talking about reallocation of resources because Division A volume came down significantly and Division B volume went up significantly. And Division B was requesting for reallocation of some of the resources from Division A to Division B. And Division A was expecting his volume to go up the following quarter and trying his best to hold on to those resources, right? I actually recommended that Division A should release its resources now rather than hang on to it until next quarter. The Division B head looked up in surprise at me and he was very pleased. And the reason he did that was because he knew, and everybody knew, that Division A head and I were good friends. I mean, we go out for lunch together, we even go out for dinner and some other function together. But in my mind, I don't take sides, right? I support what is best for the company. On another occasion, our company actually have a policy, a travel policy, that if you take a travel advance, you have to submit your claims within 7 days after you return to the company. So I have a division head who traveled, came back, and after a week, he didn't submit his claim. So my accountant sent him an email requesting for him to submit the claim. Another week passed, and he still didn't submit his claim. A couple of days after that, the accountant went to see him and told him that he has to submit his claim because the policy says within 7 days. Now, I think my accountant was quite demanding in insisting that he submit his claim. So the division head was very unhappy about that. He came to me and said, your accountant cannot do that to me. I said, but that is company policy, right? Within 7 days, you have to submit your claims. What's your problem? He said, she can't talk to me like that. I am a director. I looked at him and said, yes, but you're not God, right? I think he was so upset with me, but that's okay because, I mean, he and I got along very well, you know, I mean, until today, we are still friends. So it leads actually to what I call a sense of humor. And this is very important in a US company. If you all remember earlier, I was talking about the disastrous presentation in my first meeting with the CEO. Well, I managed to keep the job, right? And about a year later, when I was in the US, I was with the corporate controller having beer in his backyard. And he asked me, do you remember your first presentation? I said, yes. And he said, during one of the break, I asked you whether you would like to join us for a drink at the end of the day. And you replied, sure, if I still have a job. Then he continues that. At that moment, I felt that you have a sense of humor, you can laugh at yourself, and you will be okay. And that actually allowed me to launch my career in the US technology company. We use humor to break tension in a meeting. We use humor to ease boredom in seminars. And we even use humor in family gatherings. I mean, I have 3 brothers, but I can never understand why my sister keeps insisting that she has 4 brothers. The other thing I would like to suggest in positioning yourself is that you need to change your stereotype. Accountants are known to be misery and cautious. And as guardians of the resources of the company, we have to be careful. But we don't have to be misery, right? We cut where you can, but you should always allocate funds for development. On a personal basis, I suggest you can be generous. I mean, at the end of the day, I think accountants are generally quite well paid, so let's be generous about it, right? I give to charities, and I often donate to Wikipedia as I use its articles, all right? And you must always be part of the solution. Now, accountants think their job is just to present the numbers. That may be true for accountants, but I think as controllers, you need to define the agenda. I mean, my disastrous first presentation is something that I really take to heart. I really learned, and I want you to learn that also, because that presentation was not from a controller. That was just showing numbers and expecting my audience to digest an eye chart, right? And since then, I have learned to present what I want to tell the audience, right? And of course, at the end of the day, all this, you need to maintain your relationship with your bosses and your peers. Now, I always say, I have always mentioned that I was difficult and things like that. But I think in general, I got along well with most of my bosses. I say most because a couple of them really hate my guts, right? To many people, bosses are to be obeyed because your careers are in their hand. I listen, but I don't always obey, not blindly anyway. But like I have said, I am always open-minded, I am direct, I do my homework, and I speak my mind. But I also know I have to depend on my bosses to get my work done and to progress in my career. There is a book that I would like to recommend to you all. It is called Horse Sense by L. Rice and Troll. Both of them were, I think, marketing gurus back in the 1970s. I know that's a long time ago. I picked up their books maybe 20, 30 years ago, and it helped me a lot. It basically says that even as the president of the United States, you don't become the president just by purely your effort. You need your party to support you. You need the voters to vote for you, right? And it's not just I do everything by myself, right? Other parties that you need to forge relationship with are your auditors, your lawyers, and other professional parties. I mean, you need to maintain professional relationship with them. There's nothing to be fearful of your auditors or lawyers or I mean, they are there to protect the company. I would take it that your job is also to protect the company, right? Now, when it comes to customer and supplier, as a finance person, you have to be a bit more circumspect. Be friendly, but not overly. I mean, being friendly to customer and all really is the job of the sales and marketing people. I mean, as an accountant, as a controller, I don't suggest you are nasty to them. You have to be friendly, maybe cordial, but you don't have to go out of your way. Most suppliers would tend to keep their distance from finance people anyway, unless they need help, because it seems like they are worried that finance may find fault with them. So let me recap. In the first part, I share some gems on operational finance, your financial nuts and bolts. And this, again, I would like to emphasize, are your foundations. Part two, I focus on pushing your role, how you establish yourself as your controller and eventually as a CFO. How do you contribute to the business? How do you carry yourself as a controller and as a CFO, and not just as an accountant? Finance is very powerful, and I'm not just talking about authority rise. I mean, finance, yes, we are guardians of the company resources. That is very important. That is very powerful. But also very important is that we have to analyze and present and recommend to management on what we think are steps forward that are important, that will help the company financially, right? I hope you find the podcast useful and engaging. Please give me your feedback. At the beginning, I said there is a test, but what I want you to do is maybe review your notes that you have taken of this podcast and see how you can apply it in your career. You're welcome to share this podcast to your network. You can get, like I said, you can reach me on LinkedIn or on my emails. And once again, I would like to say thank you for joining me and have a good day.